Here, just do it.
All right, go ahead and make your way in. We are here at Breakout Session 2, and I'm going to be welcoming back up Douglas Axe. Most of you, if not all of you, have already heard him once. You've already heard him introduced, so I don't want to try to retell you about him, but I do have a couple of things that I wanted to tell you about him you maybe didn't know from before. First of all, he's clearly wearing a gray shirt now. But on the drive here, we don't know if it was gray or black or blue or red. But that's okay because physics is not our base reality for what he's about to present. But even more important than that, last April, Douglas became a grandfather. Yeah. And he loves his grandson, which is a 10-month-old, lovely, embodied soul. So we are thankful for that. So please give a warm welcome to Douglas Axe.
Thank you. I am indeed a grandpa. Walker is my grandson, 10 months old. A lot of fun. He lives in Irvine with his mom and dad. My daughter is his mom, and so we get to see him and them quite frequently, which is beautiful. And you know, if you've done parenthood and grandparenthood is a little different. It's kind of more the fun and a little bit less of the work. It's very nice. But I loved the first round. I love kids, and raising kids has been a singular, wonderful delight in my life. And so it feels like I get to do that again a little bit as a grandfather. So we did our quantum physics. Am I going to have a countdown clock up there, by the way? We did our quantum physics before. We can now do biology, and I'm a biologist, but I do have training in physical sciences. Let's talk a little bit more about life. So this talk is going to be why intelligent design. I think maybe you've all heard of intelligent design. It's a version of creationism in that it claims God is the one who is responsible for life, but it doesn't get into the, is it 6 day or is it long? Is it young Earth or old Earth? It doesn't wrestle with how you interpret Genesis so much as say, do the science right, and the science will point to the fact that, in fact, someone very brilliant has designed life. So that's kind of the approach. And that's the approach that I've been involved in for a long time. All the big players in this field are good friends of mine. So what I'm going to show you is how if we just look at life, so we don't have to turn to Genesis, but you should, just look at life and you'll see that life speaks for itself. Kind of the way in my earlier talk, if you look at physics, it declares something, and what it declares is, I'm not the base reality. Look somewhere else if you want the base reality. Life declares lots of things too. Okay, natural selection. What is it? It's survival of the fittest. So this is a quote of Charles Darwin. He said, it may be said that natural selection is daily and hourly scrutinizing throughout the world the slightest variations, rejecting those that are bad, preserving and adding up all that are good, silently and insensibly working whenever and wherever opportunity offers at the improvement of each organic being in relation to its organic and inorganic conditions of life. A lot of words there. But what he's saying is this thing, natural selection, which is just basically differential survival, is sifting life of every kind at all times and bringing up to the top the things that are better reproducers and suppressing the things that are less good reproducers. He actually Darwin didn't coin the term survival of the fittest, but here he credits his friend with that. So he said, this preservation during the battle for life of varieties which possess any advantage in structure, constitution, or instinct, I have called natural selection, and Mr. Herbert Spencer has well expressed the same idea by the survival of the fittest. So he gives his stamp of approval. Survival of the fittest is what it is. And I want to show you that it is not actually a good explanation for life, contrary to the claims of many people to this day. So I'm going to give you two arguments against the primacy of fitness, meaning life doesn't look like it's about fitness. And if Darwin's mechanism were actually the creator of life, it should look like it's nothing but a ruthless survival game. It does not look like that when we look at life. And the two arguments are going to be, first, the kinds of life that we see out there should surprise a Darwinist. They don't look like what they should look like in a Darwinian world. And the second is, it's common, in fact, for the innate characteristics of one kind of life to benefit another kind of life at its own cost. In other words, sacrificial themes are a part of life. That would never happen in a Darwinian world. But in the real world, you'll see there are living kinds that give of themselves to help another living kind, which has sort of a gospel theme to it. It's a divine theme. It's not a Darwinian theme, and it's definitely there in life. And then, not just showing that survival of the fittest and natural selection are inadequate, I want to land on something that is the key argument for the design of life. So we'll do all three of these in order. So the first is the kinds of living things that we see on this planet should surprise a Darwinist. So if Darwin's theory, and it didn't, and we can show that it doesn't work, but if it were the creator of life, you should really expect to see animals of these different kinds. Either it's going to have a good offense, it's good at killing, or a good defense. If you read the text here, it says, an East Texas man was wounded after he fired a gun at an armadillo such as this one in his yard, and the bullet ricocheted back to hit him in the face. Very good defense. Armadillo has a very good defense. Good offense, good defense, or rapid reproducers. So I picked a mosquito here. You could pick others. Not a particularly good offense, not a particularly good defense, but bajillions of them hatching all over the place. So many of them, it's very hard to get rid of them. My question is, and I'm not saying that these three things look like they're just a brute force survival machine. I think there's elegance in the great white shark. I think there's elegance in this. I'm not going to say that's elegant, but there's a lot more than just survival. But I'm just saying, if we look at these categories of ways to do survival in a very effective manner, you would expect everything to fit one of these, all the animals to fit one of these. And if you can think, I'm going to show you a bunch of them that I'm thinking of, you can probably think of things that aren't any of those, and they're here. So this is not a Darwinian world. This is one of them. This is a hedgehog. It says, hedgehog suffering from balloon syndrome before deflating. I submit to you that any animal that can have balloon syndrome and need to be deflated is not a ruthless survival machine. But you can also think of things that are like the snail. So think of the snail as a slow-moving, tasty piece of meat. It does have a shell on its back, which could be offered as a defense, although it's not highly effective. Birds can easily tip them over and pick the snail out of the shell. But the slugs are a brightly colored, slow-moving piece of meat with no shell on its back. They shouldn't exist, but they're here, and they do just fine. How about birds, the flightless or very impaired flight birds, like the peacock is a classic example, but there are lots of these. So, and the peacock is the male, the peahen is the female. She doesn't look nearly, it's the reverse of humans, right? She's not impressive looking, he is impressive looking. But he carrying all this plumage, and you've seen these gorgeous displays, the peacock display, carrying all these massive feathers, he can't fly very well at all. And a Darwinist would say, well, there was something called sexual selection accounts for the origin of the peacock. And they would say that the hen, the female, will not mate with a male unless he has this full-on impressive display. But think about that a little bit. If this were a Darwinian world, the answer to that, or the way you should question someone who gives that explanation is, anybody think of it? Why would Darwinism give you a hen that wants that kind of male as opposed to a sharp-clawed, good-fighting, fast-flying male? So why would it give you the hen that wants something that's not at all about ruthless survival? That's not a Darwinian thing. It's something else. There's also very remarkable aspects of the peacock that you may not know. You've seen the display, and you know the feathers that look like they have eye spots on them. The beautiful art. those aren't actually pigmented feathers. There's no pigment making the shape of the eye. Instead, it's thin film refraction. Like oil, if you see oil on water, you see the rainbow effect of oil on water. That's thin film interference, which means light is coming through the oil film, bouncing off the water, but also bouncing off the oil film, and you get interference. So there's appearance of color. There's no rainbow color in your oil, but when it's on water, it looks like it's rainbow color. Well, this is an exquisite, we can't even manufacture things to this degree of precision. Exquisite precision, thin film interference in the peacock feather that gives color where there's no pigment. It's actually an extraordinary thing. They're not the only poor flying birds. You got your chickens, your rooster. And mind you, this is a wild rooster, which is a little more, if you go to the, our chicken raising places, they're not very fit at all. This is a little more fit, but they're not good flyers. They can fly up to the tree. And then there's birds like this. Recognize that guy? The extinct dodo, okay? He's described as a clumsy, flightless, extinct bird. And a Darwinist might say, well, there you go. If you can't fly, you go extinct. But no. A Darwinian world never should have produced the dodo. And the dodo was here for a long time until it was hunted to extinction. So this is not a Darwinian world. So think of it this way. The triune God coming to think about creation before they speak creation into existence, and for their own pleasure, for the pleasure of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, they are conceiving of what they will create. We're the pinnacle of creation, made in the image of God himself. Is that going to be just a boring engineering session where they're contemplating this, or is this excitement and all kinds of creative energy within the Godhead when they come to the point of creation and life in particular? It's going to be the latter. We're creative and we love creation because we're made in God's image. That's exactly what God does. He loves exploring what's possible. He loves doing wild and fanciful things, and life on earth shows that to the extreme. Okay, looking again at animals that are not ruthless survival machines. This is the capybara, which is the largest rodent. These are like dog-sized rodents. The largest rodent. They're not fierce fighters. They do get killed by other things, and they're just okay with it. Or the sloth, slow-moving, furry piece of meat, and it's okay with that. Is it possible in a divinely created world that some creatures are what they are just to be adorable, not to be? Yes, it is possible. The panda, notorious for not being good at making baby pandas. You've heard the stories. They try to get male and female together. They just like being pandas. There's another animal that I only heard of. See, what I do is I tell my students about these, and they said, have you heard of the quokka? I said, no, here's the quokka. Meet the quokka, the world's happiest animal, native to a place in Australia. Quokkas are famous for their permanent smiles and friendly personalities. Okay, so you hold your camera up and they smile for the camera. This is not a ruthless survival machine. This is just God having fun, and we delight in it as well. Okay, now, here's another aspect of this. No, in a Darwinian world, no animals or plants would have life cycles that by design are longer than they need to be. In other words, they wouldn't delay reproduction. And yet you have in both the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom examples where you have a long delay in reproduction. The cicadas are an example. So these are an insect. There are annual cicadas, but there are also 17-year cicadas and 13-year cicadas. So the 17-year cicada, they come out in full force by the millions every 17 years. And then they're just in hibernation. I don't know whether it's the eggs or the larvae are in hibernation for 16 years waiting for that 17th year. Well, why? If every year you could have a new set of offspring, why would you wait 17 years? In a Darwinian world, you wouldn't. If it's only about passing your DNA down, you would never do it this way. But in a divinely created world, you would, because you can. And there's another interesting thing, kind of brilliant. There's a 13-year cicada and a 17-year cicada. Any mathematicians know any of you notice anything? They're prime. And why would that be significant? They're both prime. What if there were like a 6-year cicada and a 12-year cicada? They would overlap, and you'd get the 6 coming out at the same time as the 12. But 13 and 17, almost never are you going to get both the 13 and the 17 coming out in the same season. So there's brilliance to the way God has done this. This is the agave plant. It's also called the century plant sometimes. This is used in Southern California landscaping all over the place. And usually you don't see the big flowering stalk coming off it. Usually you see this. We have some of these in our backyard. It's called the century plant because it will go in this vegetative state for 30 years. And then it sends up a stalk, flowers, and dies. Okay? Why? So many other plants do annual flowering. If life is only about rapid passing on of DNA, if it's about ruthless survival and rapid reproduction, you would never have creatures like this. And you do. They're all over the place. Another aspect of this is lives or life cycles that by design are harder than they need to be, okay? So yes, there's going to be, in a Darwinian world, yes, there's going to be survival of the fittest, there's going to be challenges to you surviving, but why would you pick a way of living that makes it harder than it needs to be? You would never do that. You'd pick the way that's maximally optimizing your chances of reproductive success. And if there are predators and things that make it hard, then you deal with that. But you wouldn't just make your life cycle be harder than it needs to be. And there are lots of examples where the life cycle by design is much harder than it needs to be. My family and I lived in the Pacific Northwest for 15 years. The salmon are a great example of this because this is a fish that hatches from the egg in freshwater streams, lives as a smolt until it's a certain size, like 7, 8, 9 inches, moves from freshwater to saltwater, so up there in the Pacific Northwest, moves into Puget Sound and becomes a saltwater fish, and then grows to maturity, and these are big fish, many years in saltwater, until their biological clock tells them, okay, it's time to bring about the next generation. And so the males and the females fight their way, they're saltwater fish now, this big, fighting their way up rapids, up into small streams. You'll see these big fish in 9-inch deep water making their way to the place where they were born, and then they lay eggs and they bring about the next generation. They're dying along the way because they can't eat. They're now in fresh water. So they're literally dying, making their way back up to where they were born. Now, you've probably also seen bears taking advantage of this, right? Because they do it this hard way, bears will be in these rapids and streams waiting for the salmon and then grab the salmon out of the air. And they don't seem to care. Salmon do it the way salmon were designed to do it. And yes, there's a cost to it, but it's almost as though in a Darwinian story, everything is brute force. You get there as quickly as you can because there's only one objective, and that is reproduction. In a divinely designed world, that's not the only. Things do reproduce, but there can be stories that are being told along the way. So it's as though God gives these things attributes in order for a story to unfold. And there's a story of heroism and sacrifice in a lot of these. And for salmon, most of them don't make it, but some of them do. And that's the story of the salmon. It's also possible that part of God's intent for salmon is not only that salmon bring about more salmon, but that salmon feed the bears or the orcas. That can be in a divine economy. It's not in a Darwinian economy. Okay, this next one. I think I have an internet connection here. Let me just say, this isn't as bad as it looks. But I'm going to show you this something called the barnacle goose, whose way of bringing up its children is just crazy. Will this work? I don't have my cursor here. Boom. Uh-oh. Is there a way to get the sound coming? Will it do the sound? No, that's not the sound. I'll just play it from my computer. It made it. Okay, so these geese, by instinct, build their nests 400 feet up on cliffs. And I don't know why that was decided that this is fly day, because it didn't look like those wings are ready for flight. But these poor little chicks are launching out 400 feet up, hitting the cliff. Some of them don't make it. Some of its siblings did not make it. But the question is, why do they do this? Why do the parents make their nest there? And why has this bird been given this instinct that, okay, I'm going for it? It makes no sense if ruthless survival is the point of everything in life. On the other hand, like the salmon, if there are other points that God is making, then this is a bird that's doing this not because it chose to, but because this is what it is. This is how you do life as a barnacle goose. And it's crazy. I've heard Darwinists say, well, they have to build their nest way up because there are foxes down below. Okay, but the bird ends up down there anyway, and you've fallen 400 feet. You don't have to be 400 feet up to be out of reach of a fox, so that doesn't wash. The thing is, Darwinists are constrained to always give an answer in terms of natural selection and fitness. As believers, we're not so constrained. We can say there are other reasons that living things have the characteristics that they do, and it's not always about survival. Okay, number 2, it's common for the innate characteristics of one kind to benefit another kind at its own cost. You may have, if you've studied biology, you may have seen charts like this that are describing the interspecies relationships where two species interact in some way. And they're typically described in terms of these categories. There's mutualism, like the sea anemone and the clownfish, where they both benefit. There's commensalism, where one benefits and the other is unaffected, so like barnacles on a whale. And there's parasitism, like a tick or a flea on a dog, where the actor is benefiting at the expense of the victim, kind of. This grid assumes that the acting individual is always acting out of self-interest, right? Because that's the only way it can happen in a Darwinian world. The flea wants to survive, and it doesn't care what happens to the dog. Or the tick that wants to survive, it doesn't care what happens to the dog, so it will happily take advantage of the dog. There's no category here for a different sort of relationship, which is altruism, or I'm going to give you another category. So altruism is behavior by an animal that is not beneficial to or may be harmful to itself, but that benefits others of its species. That's not on that chart. Why? Because it doesn't fit in a Darwinian grid. In fact, altruism goes against Darwin's explanation for origin of species. Because if you imagine a parent species that branches off, a new species in Darwin's story arises only by competition among peers, among siblings, among cousins. And something wins that competition, it becomes the new branch, a new line, and it displaces the prior branch, the prior line. So altruism, which is brother helping cousin, sister helping cousin or sibling, that doesn't work in a Darwinian world. This isn't a Darwinian world, because this is all over the place in life. Even more extreme is something that I've termed uber altruism, which is behavior by an animal or a plant, and I'll show you examples, that is not beneficial to or may be harmful to itself, but that benefits others of another species. This cannot happen in a Darwinian world. It's species A doing something at cost to itself to help species B. That cannot happen in a Darwinian world. It's all over the place, okay? So this is the Norwegian orca, killer whale, and the herring that they feed on. When they slap their tail flutes on the water, the herring form a tree of herring. So it's a school, but it's a school where they're stunned and they're not actually swimming on the outside of this tree, and the orca can just pick fruit off the tree. They just eat herring. And schooling is described in a Darwinian sense as a protective mechanism. So if you're prey, you form a big group and you stay together as a group. If you actually think about it, these fish would do better to disperse, right? Because a herring can't outswim in terms of raw speed an orca, but it can outmaneuver an orca. So an orca would never be able to catch one herring out here. It wouldn't even go after it. But when they form a tree and they're stunned, they're really giving food to the orca. And you can't describe it that way if you're a Darwinist. But if you're not a Darwinist and you realize that God made not just each species, but the whole thing to fit together, then it makes sense that part of what herring do is feed orca. And they also keep the herring going, but they also feed the orca. Okay, if you've done a lot of plant observing or done walks through woods, you may have seen leaves on trees that have weird growths on them. I'm going to show you some pictures. So this is an oak tree. Oak trees are famous for this, but willow trees, this looks like barnacles growing on a tree. That seems out of place. This looks like, it's called a banana gall. This is a gall on a cedar tree. This looks like a pine cone, but it's on a willow tree. If you cut this open, it looks like this. It's called the willow pine cone gall. So what's happening here is, and they have crazy shapes and structures. This one is like a bottle and stopper gall. It's a little bottle with a cork in it. And these insects grow up as larvae inside the bottle to be protected. And then when it's time, they push the cork out and they emerge and they fly out. The Darwinian explanation for this is that insects are exploiting the plants and injecting them with a chemical that makes them make this house for the insect larvae to grow up. The fact is the plant is making the house, the larvae do grow up and they're protected by it, but there's no DNA, there's no instructions going from the insect to the plant. There's a signal. So the plant is, the insect is signaling to the plant, I'm here, and the plant makes the house for the insect. The correct interpretation of this, I say, is the plant was made to provide a house for this insect. And all the insect is doing is saying, I'm here. And the plant says, okay, here's your house. And it does. It comes at cost to the plant, but that's the way God designed the living economies. It's explained perfectly well in Scripture. Here's plants made to be in service of animals. Genesis 1:29-31. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. This is not a Darwinian account, because the plants are after their own thing. They don't want anything eating them. Everything's out for itself in a Darwinian world. That's not the case in a divine world, and this is a divine world. Let me show you another example. We were talking downstairs, actually, about certain kinds of trees are either male. A lot of trees they have both the male and the female perfect flowers, perfect blossoms. But there are some trees where there's a male tree and a female tree, and they have to grow up, obviously, in proximity so that the male can give pollen that pollinates the female tree. Cottonwood up in the Pacific Northwest, if anyone ever lived in the Pacific Northwest, there's a time of year, these are very tall, they grow very vertically, trees, and there's a time, I think it's in June, when cotton is just blowing everywhere, and people have their windshield wipers on. It's a nuisance, because all the cottonwood trees, the females, are putting out seed, little teeny seeds there on tufts of cotton-like, and it blows in the wind, and it plants cottonwood trees by the millions. So millions of seeds being produced each year by a female cottonwood tree. We had 3 of them in our yard, so there's a lot of this going on. Now, in a world, this is very efficient reproduction, right? So if reproduction were the point of trees and the only point of trees, they would all do it this way, right? Millions and millions of trees get planted every year by every female. You wouldn't have trees, there's another way you can do this with trees and plants. Another strategy is also up in the Pacific Northwest is the blackberry. So in the case of the blackberry, you have a fruit that has little seeds in it. Birds eat the fruit, swallow the fruit, and then poop the seeds. So instead of having wind disperse your seeds, the birds are taking your seeds. And when they poop, they plant another blackberry. But you would never have in a Darwinian world, if this is just about reproduction, you would not have this kind of tree, okay? Because I guarantee you no bird ever pooped one of these seeds. Here you have not millions, but a couple hundred of pieces of fruit on each tree. They're way too big. Birds would peck at this, but they won't even remove the seed, and the seed would just fall to the ground. There's only one explanation for the peach, for the avocado, for lots of things like this. Why does the peach tree put all these resources into making the flesh of the peach? For us. It's for us. It's not making the peach tree. It's not making the peach for the peach tree. It makes the seed to reproduce, but the flesh of the peach is for us. Another example of this is the avocado. And you'll see people say, I've heard people say, well, the flesh of the avocado helps the seed grow. That's just not true. Have you ever stuck toothpicks in an avocado seed? You put it in a jar with water. You can grow a tree from just the seed. The seed has everything it needs to grow the tree. So why is the avocado there? It's there for guacamole. It's there for us, okay? In a Darwinian world, you can't say that, and they won't say it because they can't say it. It makes no sense. In a divinely created world, it makes perfect sense that these things were made in order that we and other creatures would enjoy and benefit from the fruits of these plants. Okay, none of this is Darwinian. It all shows that survival of the fittest cannot be the whole story. It just clearly isn't. I want to land on one more argument, and that is a key argument for the design of life. Not just that natural selection and fitness aren't the whole story, but the design clearly is the correct story. And this is an argument that's based on a term that I coined called functional coherence. So functional coherence is the hierarchical arrangement of parts or aspects or circumstances needed for anything to produce a high-level function, with each part contributing in a coordinated way to the whole. So schematically, you could diagram this like this. You have something that has a high-level function. We'll call it an invention, is the top circle. And anything that does this, anything that pulls together lots of different things to do something complicated, has to have parts within parts within parts, all the way down to elementary constituents. And in a real tree of this, and this goes for human-made things like smartphones and helicopters. It goes for human-made things like paragraphs and sentences, but it also goes for the things that God has made in the living world. If you take a paragraph, the top level thing would be the point of the paragraph, and then you have sentences under the paragraph. You have words under each sentence or phrases under each sentence, and it goes all the way down to letters of the alphabet. These arrows pointing up are meant to imply that you can't just take any letters and put them together and call it a word. It has to be particular letters that make a word, and you can't take just any words. It has to be words that go together and make sense. So these arrows mean that there is a constraint on the things below the arrow that's only satisfied by meeting certain rules in order to accomplish that top level function. Which means you have to know what you're doing at each level to get the function at the next level up. Which means if you don't know what you're doing and you're just throwing things together, you'll never get that top level function. You can actually do calculations of the probability, and it's astronomically low that you'd get this kind of arrangement just by throwing things together, because there's too many things that have to be right at each level in order for the top level function to be performed. Now, this is true of all things that perform high level functions. So if you take a digital camera, you don't have to take it apart to know that it must have parts within parts in order for it to do what it's doing. You just have to see that it's doing something at a high level. And you could take it apart. It does invalidate the warranty. Whoa, it just invalidated my warranty. What happened? Oh, we're back. Okay, so you have all these parts, and I can't name I can see what a few of these parts are doing, but there's a lot of parts up there that I have no idea what they're doing. But we know they're doing something that's contributing to that top level function of a camera, a digital camera working as a digital camera, or it wouldn't be there, right? So these are the sorts of things that do not come about willy-nilly. Someone has to know what they're doing to arrange these things. And if that's true of something like a paragraph or a camera, imagine how much more true or more impressively true it is of something like this. Okay, so we are, now I've said before, we are not just physical things, right? Because we are immaterial, mind, soul, spirit, knit to a physical body. But our physical bodies themselves are remarkable things that do show, to a very impressive degree, this kind of hierarchical arrangement. I'm going to give you a little taste of this. So, if we take the human body, conceding that there's more to a human than a human body, and we look at how remarkable is this hierarchy of arrangement of things that allows a human body to do what a human body is supposed to do, was designed to do. The top level would be, the very top level would be a human being. Below that would be the immaterial part of a human being, mind, soul, spirit, and body. And then below body would be all these things. The layer below body would be organs that make up a body. So here's a diagram that shows many of them, not all. The largest, or what's the largest organ in the human body? The skin is not there. I just think that would have been creepy, so they didn't do it. So you have lots of organs in the human body. Now imagine we could take any one of these organs and do branching below it to show the tissues in this organ, all of which have to have the properties that they do in order for it to do its job, in order for the human body to do its job, in order for the human to be what the human was designed to be. So one of those organs is the eye. You see the two eyes there up over the right arm. The eye has the retina, the cornea, the sclera, the lens, the vasculature, all of these tissue components that must be arranged just so in order for an eye to do what an eye needs to do, in order for our body to do what our body needs to do, in order for us to do what we were designed to do. And you could look at any one of these tissues and you see cellular level complexity. So this is a little piece of the retina, and you've heard of the rod and cone cells that have their different roles within the retina, and you can see that refers to the bottom point as either a rod shape or a cone shape. And this matrix of cells is basically the photosensitive cellular layer that allows vision to work. So light comes in, focused by the lens, onto the retina. These light-sensitive cells are constantly refreshing and being stimulated by light to send an electrical signal. All those signals get collected and go through the optic nerve out the back of your eye to the visual processing center in the brain. And all of this is remarkable. It wouldn't happen unless you had all this complex structure together. Now, I'm just going to quickly connect. So we said mind, soul, spirit connected to physical body. I want to tell you how I picture this working is those signals go out the optic nerve, go to the visual processing center. The brain is a physical thing, and it's got all these neural things that are doing a calculation on this signal coming from a bajillion rod and cone cells and pulling it together into something that's ready to be given to you, not as an electrical signal, but as red or the landscape or a cloud, some visual thing that you actually experience. And here you get a jump between a physical system, that's all the brain is, and an immaterial thing, which is the experience of a blue sky. There is no blue in physics. Did you know that? There's no blue. It's not there. You've got photons, and there are different wavelengths, but blue's not there. Blue is up here. It's a concept. So someone has to be taking this material thing, and when it's ready, giving it to you. And if you go the other way, like if we are playing Frisbee and you're going to throw a Frisbee, you're saying right hand, or if you're left-handed, throw the Frisbee. But you don't know how to work a brain. I don't know how to work a brain. You're just saying, here's what I'm intending to do. Someone is in there with you who knows how to work a brain and knows your thoughts before you think them and goes, okay, moving the right hand, now we move it into the brain like this way. It goes to the motor cortex, does all those calculations, goes down through the spine, branches that come out the spine, go to the right, nerves that control the muscles, and you throw the frisbee, okay? And we take this all for granted because we do it every day. But this doesn't work unless someone's there with us all the time making it work. Who must that be? It has to be someone who knows everything about the physical world and can control it, and someone who knows your thoughts before you think them. There's only one person it can be. God is making this work, this marriage work. So in the other talk where I gave the diagram of the immaterial mind and the physical body, and they kiss, where those two circles kiss, God is the one who is orchestrating that exchange. There's no other explanation for it. Physics can't touch thoughts, and thoughts can't touch physics, but God touches both. Okay. The complexity of every individual cell has been compared to a city-like complexity inside a cell, and you can keep going down below that to the organelles, to individual molecules, in this case an enzyme, which is a protein molecule that does chemistry. This is a monster of a molecule, but it's a molecule, so it's tiny, but it's a very big molecule called the ribosome. So this is the, now I'm getting confused on the timing. The timing just changed. Oh, my God.
You're good. You got like 4 more minutes till Q&A, depending on if you want to take more time.
I'll be done here quickly, and then I'm going to do Q&A. So remember, we're talking about this hierarchy, and what I'm saying is, if you thought it was amazing in the digital camera, this should blow you away, because I'm only taking one little path down here. You could take all these paths and you just fill the walls with diagrams of what's complex in us that allows us to work. It's down at this molecular level. This is the enzyme that reads the RNA. And everyone learned about RNA during the COVID era because of RNA vaccine. But RNA is like a transcript of DNA, and this is the enzyme that reads the RNA and makes a protein out of it. So the idea of the COVID vaccine was, if you give a spike protein RNA, your cells will use their ribosomes to make the spike protein, or a part of the spike protein. But this is the enormous machine engine that does that inside every cell, making all of your proteins, not viral proteins. This is necessary for life. Well, this is where I've done most of my research, is looking at the different forms of these proteins and what it takes in order for them to fold from a chain of amino acids into these remarkable structures that allow them to do what they're supposed to do inside a cell in order for us to live. And I chose one particular, this is just the genetic code. So the ribosome is doing its job by basically instantiating a code where nucleotide bases taken 3 at a time, A, C, G, and T, 3 at a time, are used to encode 20 amino acids. And the ribosome and the tRNAs are used to do that. So I looked at one of these enzymes and I was thinking, well, how hard is it to get one of these to work, to get a chain of amino acids to fold and do what it's supposed to do? And I chose this one, which is called beta-lactamase. This was work that was done in the UK. And the green thing there is penicillin. So this is the enzyme that we don't like it, because bacteria, if they make this enzyme, they're resistant to penicillin, amoxicillin, ampicillin, all of those penicillin antibiotics, which sometimes don't work, and sometimes they don't work because of this, okay? But this is great for my experiment, because I thought, I can mess up this, I can shuffle the amino acids in this enzyme, put the genes in millions of bacteria, put them on Petri dishes with penicillin, and count how many of those shuffled ones still work. Because if they work, then I'll get a bacterial colony. If they don't work, it won't grow. It'll be killed by the penicillin. So I can do a test and see what fraction of these shuffled versions work. And so I did that, and a paper was published now a long time ago. This was in 2004 in the Journal of Molecular Biology. And I'll tell you the numerical result, but the number is so staggering it's hard to picture it. The result was that we would expect about 1 in 10 to the 77th randomly assembled chains like this to fold into a functional form. 1 in 10 to the 77th power. So that's 1 in 100,000 trillion, 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 trillion. And when I sent the paper off, I thought, this has got to be the end of Darwinism, because there's no way anything can hit a target that small. If you think of this as a blindfolded, say, archer trying to hit a target, which you could think of it that way, because Darwinism is blindfolded, it doesn't know where it's going. If it has to hit something this remarkable, and you think of it as a blindfolded archer trying to hit a target, it would be like trying to hit a target the size of a hydrogen atom on a wall the size of a sphere enclosing the visible universe. And that's just not going to happen. So, I will end there, and I think my time is up, and I've got time for questions on this or on the other talk or on anything. What's that?
What happened to your paper? What they say?
They loved it. No, it got published because I was very careful, and I was kind of undercover here. I was thinking, look, I'm asking a question that everyone's asking. I'm working on proteins, and I'm not going to write in my conclusion that this is the end of Darwin's theory. Then they wouldn't have taken it. What I did do is say this raises questions for the origin of proteins. And because I said it carefully like that, and because all the work was rock solid, it got in and it got published. Now, as soon as it got published, then people started shrieking. Some people started shrieking. And, decades later, people were saying, Axe is wrong, or this, it doesn't mean what. But what has never happened in the decades since then is all the work since then has affirmed that, yeah, it's actually correct. And, how did I get up there? So that work stands to this day. And other work has shown that the number is correct. And the people who have said that it's not correct are saying it on blogs. They're not saying it in peer-reviewed. That's a really strong peer-reviewed journal. And the result has stood the test of time.
When I had biology, we talked about ribosomes and protein manufacture. I understood. Scientists don't understand how those proteins actually are constructed by the ribosomes. Has that changed?
How a ribosome makes a protein?
Yeah. The little machine in there that's kind of like a black box, and something goes in.
There,
the product comes out.
In the last, say, 15 years-ish, maybe 20 years, it used to be that we didn't have an accurate structure of the ribosome. There is now, and while I was at the Laboratory for Molecular Biology in Cambridge, a guy named John Walker, got the Nobel Prize, or shared it, for solving the crystal structure of the ribosome. So there's a great deal of detail now as to what the active center of the ribosome, the various sites. It's very complex because it's having to hold on to the RNA, and then it's bringing in things called tRNA, charged tRNA, which is another RNA that has an amino acid on the end of it. It has to recognize which of these is the correct one to go onto the chain next, and then it has to make the little link. A lot of that has been shown. I think we're very far from a complete understanding, but a lot of the details are known now.
So evolution as a blind process seems to have the evidence against it, but what are your thoughts on guided evolution or theistic evolution?
So theistic evolution means different things to different people. And one of my colleagues, Michael Behe, I don't know if you've seen his work, Darwin's Black Box, he's at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. He is an intelligent design person who believes that God made an original kind of life, simple single cellular life, but he built into it the ability for it to grow into the other kinds of life. So that would be a version of evolution in that everything's related. The tree of life exists, but it's one where God designed it to branch as a tree. I don't think that works because I don't think you could carry that amount of information and have it survive. There are other people who might say that the tree is real, but God is the one who made it branch. So he had to reach in. So birds didn't just come out of reptilian life. There had to be something where God takes reptilian life and does something to it, and now you get birds. And every time there's a new development, it's God doing it. Sure, that could work. I do think, and I've written a chapter in it, there's a volume, Crossway publisher, called Theistic Evolution. It's a philosophical, scientific, and theological critique, and I've given a critique of it. I think there are still problems when you look at humanity to think that there is a continuum of life that connects us to things that aren't human. And I think that's problematic. I think it's problematic in the Imago Dei. What does it mean for us to be in the image of God if there are a bunch of apes that aren't in God's image? Well, what happened here? And there are people who said, well, God did something special, but then they interbred with apes. That's hugely problematic because it would mean some of us are more fallen than others because we have more of Adam and Eve, and others of us have less of Adam and Eve and more of the non-fallen hominids. I think that gets really problematic because these things in Scripture are described as though they comprehensively touch humanity. Creation comprehensively touches humanity. The fall comprehensively touches humanity. The incarnation comprehensively touches humanity. And what Jesus did on the cross comprehensively touches humanity. And if you start messing with what humanity is and blurring the boundaries, I think it gets doctrinally problematic. The other thing is, why do that? The only reason you would do that is if you think there's compelling evidence that the big story of evolution is true, or even the tree of life is true, and I just don't find it to be compelling. So I think it seems safer as a believer to say, I don't have any reason to buy any of this. So much of it is baloney, and you've been peddling baloney for 150 years. Why would I have to sign up to some of it? That would be my recommendation. But that said, there are these nuances where some of these people are saying something that's much more credible than what other people are.
Perhaps somewhat related to that question, do you have a particular stance on old earth versus new earth creationism?
Yeah, I don't put myself in either of those camps, and I counsel Christians to not get too, because there's been clashes like wars over age of the earth, and I think that's unhelpful when the bigger battle, I think, is, are we alone in the universe, or are we made by a personal creator God? One way to put this is, God is both the author of special, he's given a special revelation and general revelation. And since they're both from God, they can't be contradicting each other. They have to be, there has to be a harmony that holds them together. But that doesn't mean that we can necessarily zip together a full story that connects Genesis to what we see out here. There might be places where we can't make the connection, and I just think we need to humbly say, well, here's the science humbly interpreted and honestly interpreted. Here's Scripture humbly interpreted, and we can make the key connections are there, but I think we don't need to make all the connections. We can just wait and say, we've got the key connections, we know who we're supposed to follow, and we can wait for the rest to become clear.
Simply were the dinosaurs real? And were cavemen distinct from Adam?
Cavemen distinct from what?
Adam.
Adam or animals?
Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve. Dinosaurs are real. Birds, though, are, no, yes. Dinosaurs, of course dinosaurs are real, were real. Cavemen, there are still people who live in caves. So I think you have to remember that if you're a Darwinist, if you're an atheist, and there's a lot of overlap between those two sets, but not entirely. If you're an atheist, you have an intellectual problem if you have no explanation for us, okay? And that you'd feel like, yikes, we have to come up with something. That's why Dawkins wrote that Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. So if you're an atheist, you need a story for humanity. And if you go to the museums and you see how badly, desperately they're trying to make this story work, it starts to look like pseudoscience, to be honest. So you get like a piece of a jawbone and they'll have their clay reconstruction, and they always will show, they'll want to show ancient man as being slightly more hunched over and slightly more ape-like, and then this gradual progression to modern man. But that's mostly myth and mostly massaging things to fit a story rather than careful science. If you take Neanderthal, for example, the evolutionist wants there to be a seamless continuum between something that is clearly a beast, an ape, and clearly modern man, and it's just not there. Neanderthal, I say, they buried their dead, they had art, they had music, they made musical instruments. They're just human. They were just human. They had larger skull. Their average skull size was larger than modern human. So why pretend that they're another species? They're just human, okay? And they're an extinct branch of human, but there's lots of others extinct branch of human. So caveman, I think, is kind of a myth. It's not that people have never lived in caves. It's that some people still do live in caves, and it doesn't make you an animal because you live in a cave. It's just the way you're going about doing life. Is that helpful? Yeah.
So I had heard a while ago from two Christian apologetics specifically that it's generally accepted around by people that are Christians that have been really studied that there's only a human body and a human soul. Or scratch that. I think it was human body and just spirit. So not the human soul and spirit. So I was wondering what your thoughts on that.
Yeah, here we get from what I'm not comfortable. There's a very philosophical, theological thing about, that's why I say mind, soul, spirit. I just put them together, and I'm a biologist. I'm not going to tell you the difference between mind, soul, spirit. I know I'm comfortable with saying there are aspects of us that distinguish us from, there are non-physical aspects of us that distinguish us from, say, dogs. But I would say a dog is conscious and a dog has a mind. So a dog is not just a physical thing. There's a conscious mind attached to a dog. What there isn't is a spiritual being attached to a dog. Now, I think there's also confusion of terms between philosophers and theologians, because philosophers would say a dog has a soul. I would say a dog has a mind. These terms get used in different ways, and it can be quite tricky to tease them out. But what I would say in a nutshell, and I don't want to commit to certain terms, is animals, for the most part, if they have a nervous system, I think are conscious and aware, which means we should think about how we treat animals. I think there's scriptural. It doesn't mean we can't eat animals. It just means think about how you raise them and think about how you treat them. Don't muzzle the oxen while it's threshing. In other words, this is a beast that you're making do hard work. Let it breathe if it's doing hard work. Balaam's donkey, where he's whacking his donkey, the donkey's actually seeing an angel, and then God opens the mouth of the donkey converses with Balaam. So I think animals, and there have been people like Descartes denied animal consciousness, but I think you go down a horrible road of you could be brutal to animals because you think there's nothing there that can suffer, and I think that's not true. There is something that can suffer in a conscious animal. But they don't have when an animal suffers, is experiencing pain, it's not experiencing anguish. So there's a spiritual dimension to human suffering, that's anguish. Anguish of this, I would say soul, but a philosopher might use a different term. So there is something different about us than animals, but animals also have a non-physical element. I probably made a total hash of that, but I'm not competent. I don't want to wade into the doctrinal thing of saying how exactly do you distinguish spirit from soul and mind. I treat it as one thing, but I'm happy with a doctrine that says actually there's multiple things there. But if there's multiple things, there are really multiple aspects of one you, because there's a personhood. Personhood is a singular thing, and we were made to be embodied persons. So our body's important, and all of us is important. Yeah.
Awesome. Will you all join me in thanking Dr. Axe for his wonderful
Thank you,
time
guys.
here? All right, well, we'll open up the doors, and you have a little bit of time, about 15 minutes, before we're back in here for the final session.
Thank you. You bet.